Ooh, saddle up for this story. Madison County, New York hadn't even celebrated its first birthday before it got its first murder. Happy birthday, I guess? It was the last few days of March in 1807. There was this huge, unexpected snowstorm, pre-Weather Channel days. And that was obviously bad for business. And this area was covered with a whole bunch of Revolutionary War soldiers that had moved here after the war. So they decided they were going to shovel their way about a mile from Madison Center to the town of Madison in Madison County, because apparently when we find a name we like, we stick with it. Now, one of the guys that was shoveling was a man named Alpheus Hitchcock. He had taken up the job as the singing instructor after the war, and he was also noted as being the most handsome man in Madison County, if not, who knows, the entire continent. Now, I believe there was another guy there named James Collister. He was also a Revolutionary War soldier. He lived right next to Alpheus Hitchcock, and he married a woman named Abigail Hitchcock. And they're my fifth great grandparents, so I might be related to this bozo who was probably the dumbest murderer to ever exist. So about 2 p.m., they finally shoveled their way to Madison. There was 5 feet of snow, 10-foot tall snowdrifts. It took them a while. And when they finally got there, the guys decided they were going to head home. And Alpheus said, hold on, I got to run some errands. My wife is sick again. She needs some medication. I'll catch up with you guys later. So they head home. He heads into the pharmacy that was owned by Dr. Samuel Barber, who was a doctor during the Revolutionary War. And he tells Sam, I have a rat issue at home and I need some arsenic powder. And Sam doesn't think twice about this. Everybody had some for that reason, but they also gave it to their horses to increase their stamina, which obviously didn't work. So when Alpheus gets home, he sees his 5 kids around the bed of their mom, who's very sick. She's been sick a lot. Alpheus is just kind of done with it. She hadn't made him dinner again. How dare she? Nonetheless, he makes her a tea with the medication she requested in it called a puke. Now, this wasn't false advertising. They thought you got sick because the humors in your body were off, and the only way to do that, get it back to normal, was to get rid of some liquids in your body. So this would just make you throw up. Everybody took it. She drinks her tea. He goes and sulks by the fire, dinnerless again. And he's thinking, this is kind of handy. My wife is sick. Everybody knows she's really sick. And we have so much snow outside that we're very unlikely to get any nosy visitors. But then there's a knock at the door. And in walks Miss Prudence Stacy, a local young lady who heard that Mrs. Hitchcock was sick, and she stopped by to help. And you know what? We're not going to call her Mrs. Hitchcock anymore. Her name was Belinda Bailey. And I don't think she was all that happy about being married to this jerk anyway. So Prudence hasn't been there very long, and she notices Belinda's going downhill fast. She's completely blind at this point. She's burning up. She's ripping her clothes off. She wants to throw up, but she can't. She falls out of the bed and crawls across the floor and asks Alpheus, did you give me mercury by mistake? And his response was, the doctor likely knows what he sent. Meanwhile, he knows that he didn't get any medication in the first place. Prudence eventually convinces him to help get Mrs. Hitchcock, Belinda, back into the bed and go get a doctor, a neighbor, somebody, because this is bad. And Alfie says, fine, I will, but I have to milk the cow and bring in some firewood first. Not husband of the year, this guy. He's gone a while, and he comes back with nobody. No one. And Belinda dies 15 minutes later. The doctor finally arrives and he says, this looks kind of fishy, and he wants to do an autopsy, but he says later because of delicate circumstances, he didn't, but he was going to later. And I'm assuming those delicate circumstances were that Alpheus said, really? My 5 kids just watched their mom die a pretty traumatic death, and you're going to cut her open right now? Can we not? And then Alpheus has her buried like the next day. 5 feet of snow, has her buried, quick little funeral, whole thing's over real fast. Until a couple days later, the rumor mill is just flying through town. It wasn't a secret that the Hitchcocks had a very rocky marriage. He was brutal to her. But it also wasn't a secret that Alpheus had gotten himself a girlfriend, and that girl was Lois Andrus, who was one of his students. Alpheus was 35, and I like to hope that Lois was at least 16. But they were definitely not shy about their relationship and hanging out with each other. So a couple of Alpheus's fellow Freemasons insist that an autopsy is done, much to his protest. And they're like, we're going to do it anyway. And not shockingly, they find enough arsenic in her stomach contents to not just kill one person, but like an elephant, a whole herd of elephants. He is immediately arrested and taken up north to Whitestown prison. Now, you would think that a guy who's just been accused of murdering his wife would, 1, feel sad that she's gone, 2, wonder about what's going on with his 5 kids and, his beloved cow, but also try to prove his innocence. Not this guy. Instead, he spends every waking moment writing love letters to Lois. And let me tell you, ooh, they're good. Will my loving arms never enfold you again? Will I never taste those ruby red lips of thine? Does thy generous bosom ever heave a sigh for your most unfortunate friend? Meanwhile, I got a message that said, for a blonde, you're not that dumb. Cool. It's not hard to see why this young girl fell in love with this guy, and I'd rather talk to a murderer too, it turns out. These letters become the nail in the coffin for Alpheus because not only does he profess his love for Lois, but he also says if her brother could be trusted as much as her, he could maybe sneak him off some aqua fortis, which was nitric acid that he could put on the bars of his cell. He could escape off to Connecticut and meet her and marry his beloved Lois. But he's also calling her his beloved bride at this point. However, unbeknownst to him, the letters were not making it to Lois. Instead, they were landing on the desk of the district attorney. The trial was held in a schoolhouse because they didn't have courthouses all over the place, but because there was such a large audience, they had to move it to a barn just outside of Cazenovia. And that's where the verdict was read that Alpheus was very much guilty of killing his wife with arsenic, and he was to hang by the neck until dead. Because back then when you murdered somebody, they murdered you back really fast. The newspaper said as the trapdoors opened, Alpheus Hitchcock was launched into eternity. So I obviously wanted to share a headstone cleaning video with this story, but I couldn't find any. I didn't think I'd find one for Alpheus anyway. They did give murderers headstones, but it was also rumored that after they cut him down, they donated his body to the doctors in the audience for anatomy practice. So finding his headstone, or headstones in this case, would be kind of impossible. I thought I could find one for Belinda Bailey, his wife. She would have been right down the road here, and she got buried twice, but no headstone. I couldn't find one for Lois, the girlfriend, or for Prudence Stacy, the young lady that stopped to help Belinda that day and is probably the reason this whole execution ended up happening. I'm guessing they got married and moved away. But there was one I thought I could find, Dr. Samuel Barber, the pharmacist. He's buried in his own family cemetery. He would have been the first one buried there. His kids have headstones, his grandkids have headstones. He's the only one who doesn't. But I still wanted to share this because wouldn't it be nice if the murderee, Belinda, got a little recognition instead of just Alpheus? Who would have thought that a snowstorm, a sickness, and an unexpected guest would have led to the first murder and then execution of Madison County, New York?